Hey BookTube, it's Sarah and welcome back to my channel, The Book Bag. Today I'm going to be doing the in or out book tag. I was tagged by Kay's Palette and I'll have her video as well as the original creators down below. But this is basically just like a list of various tropes and trends and things that you can have an opinion about in the book community, and you just get to say whether or not you like it, whether you're in or out. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first one is reading the last page first, and I am out on this one. I do not like doing that. I will jump to the last page and look at the page number to see how long do I think it's going to take me to read this, but I don't want to know any spoilers, especially if it's like a mystery or there's like plot twists and stuff. I don't want to know. I'll figure it out when I get there. The next one is enemies to lovers. I'm kind of in the middle for this one. It's not my favorite. I much prefer like best friends to lovers. But I think if it's like more on the rivals to lovers side, I prefer that. But I won't discount a book if it's enemies to lovers. So I guess I'm tentatively in if it's done well. I just don't like it when they start off absolutely hating each other and then fall in love. I find that a little hard to buy. The third one is dream sequences. I don't think I've read a lot of books with dream sequences in them, honestly. I don't have a super strong opinion. I feel like if they're well done, they can add, to the plot. They really get you inside the characters' minds. They can kind of foreshadow and stuff. So I guess I'm in on this one, but don't care too much either way. The next one is love triangles, and I'm out on this one. It's been really popular for a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think there's only ever been a couple books where I've actually enjoyed the love triangle, but I say get rid of love triangles and just make everyone polyamorous, like in Iron Widow. Shameless plug. But yeah, so this one does a great love triangle because it's not a love triangle. They all end up dating each other, and it's great. So out on love triangles. Okay, the next one is cracked spines. I don't mind too much. I don't go out of my way to crack my book's spines, but if like the spine becomes cracked because it's, one of those like mass market paperback books, because I've read it a lot, I'm totally fine with that. It just means that I have loved it and read it, and I get some books from like secondhand stores and stuff, and I'm not gonna not buy the book because its spine is cracked. So I'm in. Back to my small town. I have not read a ton of books with this trope of like going back to the small town. The one that I can think of that I've read recently is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, and I did really enjoy that. I think it's a good way of showing like character growth, either of like, I went away and I became my own person, or I came back and I realized like things weren't as bad as I thought they were. I think it's a good tool for showing development, where you have that same character in the same setting, but you can see how one or both have changed over the years. So I'm in. I just like haven't encountered it a lot of it. The next one is Monsters Are Regular People, and I think I have there's like kind of two ways to interpret this one. So if it's in the way of like, the bad guy is like just human, where they're like, oh, he's doing all these atrocities, but like we're showing also that he's still a human and that like bad people aren't any different than good people. You too are capable of committing atrocities if you chose to do so. I think that's good. I'm in on that. But if it's more like using vampires or something as a metaphor for a certain group of people, and they're like, oh, they may be monsters, but they're people too. It's a little iffy, Like I feel like The House in the Cerulean Sea kind of did this, where they were like, oh, here's all these like magical children that are like ostracized because they're magical, but oh, they're people too, which was great until you realize that the context is that the author took inspiration for the story from the 60s scoop of the Canadian government stealing Indigenous children from their homes and like rehoming them with white people, which is horrendous and like just awful. And so when you look at the story through that lens, it becomes kind of iffy, because you're like, well, why would you use fantasy characters instead of like addressing the issue? I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. Something about it feels a little icky of like, why do you have to put it in a fantasy setting? Why can't you just talk about the issues you're trying to discuss? It feels a little bit like they're trying to sugarcoat it when that's not always appropriate. So I don't know. If they're like bad people are still people. Out if they're like, I'm going to use monsters to represent certain communities of people. Okay, so the next one is no paragraph breaks. I'm out. I don't like that. I want to have visual stopping places on my page because I'm someone who will stop reading in the middle of a chapter, but I'll try and stop it at like a paragraph break. But if there's no paragraph break and it's just like this huge block of text, it can be really daunting to read, and yeah, just like not having a natural stopping point makes it difficult to stay focused. So out on that. So we've got multi-generational sagas. I have not read a ton of these, but I feel like the ones that I have read have been really good. Like I read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and that's only 2 generations, but it's still very interesting. I think if it's well done, then it's really interesting. If there's too many generations, I will get very confused. Like there's too many characters, I can't keep them straight, and it's hard to like, you know, get a deep look into a character if you've got 20 characters that you're keeping track of. So in if it's done well, which seems to be my answer for like a lot of things. Like if you did it well, I'll read it. Next one is rereading. I am super in on this one. I love rereading books. My like favorite books I will read over and over and over again. I love to like put tabs in my books so I can flip back to like favorite moments and quotes and stuff. But I'll also just like reread the whole thing again. Like I read the Six of Crows series for the first time this year, and then I went and purchased collector's editions of them so that I can reread them like 2 months later. So I love rereading. It's great. It's so comforting. Next is artificial intelligence. And I can't think of anything I've read. I can't think of anything I've read that has artificial intelligence in it. I'm not against reading about artificial intelligence. I just am not a huge sci-fi reader, and oh no, wait, I did read Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and that's got artificial intelligence in it. And I did really like that, so I'm gonna say in based on that one series. But yeah, I'm not a huge sci-fi reader, so I haven't read a ton of books about it. I did enjoy that book, so. Number 12, drop caps. Okay, so drop caps are when they do this, and they have like a big letter at the beginning of the chapter. And sometimes they're like super fancy, like, you know, in the ye olden days when like the monks would have the like super like illuminated first letter and then just wrote the rest of the stuff. And I'm so in on those. I think they're very fun. I think it has it's like a cool formatting thing, draws your eye, and especially if they're like fancy, like if the first letter is like in a fancy font, amazing, love that. Okay, so happy endings. I'm very in. I don't want to read a book that doesn't have a happy ending most of the time. I don't want to read sad books, or let me take that back. I don't want to read books that end sadly. So like for example, A Little Life, I have not read yet. I probably will never read because apparently it's just like 600 pages of depression. And I don't need that in my life. I'm reading to escape from real life problems. I don't want to be sad. I want everyone to have a happily ever after. That is like probably my one like must have in a book. I will read books that have sad endings, but like if given a choice, happy endings all the time. So we have plot points that only converge at the end. I think I'm in on this one, because I do think it's very clever when you get to the end of a book and you can see all of a sudden how all these other things like come together and you're like, oh my god, pff, mind blown. I do really enjoy that. I am never smart enough to figure out how they're all going to like connect at the end, but it is very satisfying when everything comes together and you finally see the bigger picture. So I'm in. So we have detailed magic systems. And I think I'm out on this one. I'm not a huge fantasy reader either. Like I'm mostly YA fantasy, if anything. And I just don't have the brain power to keep track of all the like fancy magic things that are happening. I want one that's like pretty clear cut, doesn't take like 50 pages of explaining how the world works for me to get into it, because I will just put down the book. That if I have to learn too much about how things work, I yeet myself out of there. No, I'm a much more of a fan of like kind of more magical realism stuff, or just like the lighter fantasy. I don't want super detailed things where the author has like thought out every single tiny minute thing and you're like, oh my god, I don't know what's happening. So I'm out. The next one is classic fantasy races, and so that's like the gnomes and the dwarves and like Tolkien kind of stuff. And I think I'm out on those as well. I don't know that I've really read anything with those. I read The Hobbit when I was younger, and that was fine. I read Hounded by Kevin Hearn as well, and did not like that book at all. I feel like it doesn't really limit your creativity, but it's kind of like same old, you know? I like new and different things that are not too complicated, but that will bring a new element to fantasy. Okay, the next one we have is Unreliable Narrator. I don't know how I feel about that. The only book that I can think of off the top of my head is I'm Thinking of Ending Things. That's got an unreliable narrator, and that was really interesting. But like, you knew it was an unreliable narrator pretty much from the beginning, because you're like, things aren't adding up, what the heck. But I think when you have an unreliable narrator that you don't know they're unreliable, or it's not super obvious, and then at the end you're like, wait, hold on, was anything real? And you don't really get an answer to that. I'm not a huge fan of that. I want nice, wrapped up endings. I want everything tied with a bow, all the resolution, closure. So I think I'm like tentatively out on that, just because I don't have the brain power to try and figure out what's actually happening. Just tell me. Evil Protagonists. I'm out. I can't do it. I read Hench, which follows like an evil hench person, and the whole time I was waiting for her to like come around and be on the good side, and she wasn't. She just stayed evil, and I was like, I don't know what I was expecting. No, I can't do it. I can't sympathize with evil people who are just doing evil for the sake of evil. I can sympathize with people like, for example, Kaz from Six of Crows, where they have like a very strong moral compass, and they are like getting justice in their way. So like, you know, he's been wrong, so he is now like the leader of a gang. And I'm like, I can get behind that because you're trying to like fix a wrong. But if you're like straight up the villain, I can't do it. I'm sorry. I'm like, no, you're bad. I can't root for you. I don't care about your side of the story. So I'm out there. The next one is the chosen one trope. And I think I'm starting to kind of fall out of love with this trope. It just seems to be very prevalent in a lot of stuff. And I kind of like the like regular person kind of stumbles into an adventure thing more than like you are the chosen one, this is your destiny. I'm not as much of a fan of that. For example, when I read Dark Rise by C.S. Packet, like the main character, like he was the chosen one, but he just like had no personality or anything. I don't know, I think it's a little bit more interesting when the character chooses to embark on the adventure than when they're like, you are chosen, therefore you must do it. I think that element of choice is more interesting for me. Because then they've also got something that they're like fighting for, you know, if you're the chosen one, sometimes there is stuff you're fighting for, but you come to that realization afterwards, where if you're like, I have decided to do this thing, embark on this journey, solve this problem, whatever, then like you have agency, you've made that decision, you've got more that you're fighting for. So I'm gonna say out on this one. The next one is When the Protagonist Dies. And the only book I can think of that does this is, spoilers from like 10 years ago, in the Divergent series at the end of the third book when Triss dies. And I have not read the Divergent series since it came out. I read it and I liked it, and then I've not really thought of it since. But I really liked that ending. Honestly, I thought it fit with Triss's character really well. I thought it was very true to her. I thought that anything else would have been a betrayal of her character. So I think if it fits with the character's personality and like who they are, then like I'm down for it. Which I know completely contradicts my happy ending thing, but I've only read one book that's like this. So I enjoyed it in Allegiant, or I approved of it in Allegiant, so I'm gonna say in. Okay, so the next one is really long chapters. I'm out on this one, similar to like the paragraph break thing. I want somewhere with like a clear defined stop where I can stop and not just, you know, middle of the page somewhere. So I do like books that have not super short chapters, because then it's like, what? Like, okay, next chapter, and you're like, it was one page. Great, perfect. But I do like some books where they have, I don't know, like 10 pages per chapter, something like that, where when you say one more chapter, you get like a decent amount of reading time, but you also don't spend like half an hour reading a chapter, because I don't know, there's a little sense of accomplishment when you finish a chapter, and if you finish a chapter all the time, then there's no more sense of accomplishment. Like if it's one page, every chapter is like 1 or 2 pages, you're like, whatever, I've barely read. But if the chapter is like 30 pages, then it takes you forever to get to the end of the chapter, and you're like, man, I also somehow have not read, I don't know, just reader things. Like that sweet spot of like 10-15 pages is great. You're like, done some reading, it's like a good chunk of time, a good amount of reading. Yeah, I'm not up too late, but I haven't only read like 2 pages too. Anyways, that didn't make sense to anyone except for me, but it's fine. Okay, the next one is French flaps. Ah yes, so that is when the book is a paperback, but it's got those flaps like a hardcover dust jacket. And I don't really have too much of an opinion on that. They're kind of fun, like you can kind of use them when you are just reading the beginning of the book, and you can use it as a bookmark, which is good because I never seem to have a bookmark near me when I finish reading. I don't know how that happens. I own a lot of bookmarks. They're just never around. They kind of make the book feel a little fancier, and it's usually, I feel like the covers are usually this kind of more like textured. I don't know if you can see the texture on there, but like it's more textured. It's almost parchment-y. It makes them feel like a little more elevated. So I'm in, but I don't care too much. Okay, the next one is Deckled Edges. And I'm out on that. It's not like a huge problem for me. I won't not buy a book if it has deckled edges. I just don't really enjoy the feeling of them. And when I read, I don't think I have any books with deckled edges with me at the moment. Oh, this one's deckled. So it's got like those ridges. Oh yeah, it's got like those ridges on it. And when I read a book, for whatever reason, like I'll be reading, but I also like to kind of like do this as I'm reading, just as like a fidget thing. I'm not sure, but the deckled edges make it harder, a little bit harder to flip through. Like I want to see like, you know, when is the next chapter? The deckled edges make that a little difficult, so I'm not a huge fan of it. But it won't prevent me from like buying a book. Kind of out, but it's not a deal breaker. Signed copies by the author. I am so in on this one. I love having signed copies. Like I got The Betrayals by Bridget Collins signed, and it's also like a numbered edition, so I got to choose which number of the print I could get, which was not something that I knew I wanted, but was very fun. I did enjoy that a lot. So I do love signed copies. Next we have dog earing pages. I'm out on this one. I cannot do that to my books. I think it's kind of fun when you get books like from the library or secondhand to see where people have dog-eared their books, and then trying to guess like, was it something that they enjoyed or was it just where they like left off reading? So that's kind of an interesting look into like other people's brains when they're reading. But I myself cannot do it. Don't like that. No. I will put like tabs in my book. I'll put like little sticky notes in there so I can remember my favorite spots, but not anything that's going to permanently damage the book. So our last one is chapter titles instead of numbers. And I'm in on this one. I think they're very fun. I will admit I don't always read the chapter titles if they have them, but I do really like that kind of like older, like I don't know, like Dickens and stuff where they're like chapter like 60 in which they go to whoever's house and stuff like that. Like I think that's really fun. And it's kind of like a little like teaser into like what's going to happen in this chapter. Or sometimes you're like, what does this chapter title mean? And then you get to the end of it and you're like, oh my god, I know what it's talking about now. So yeah, I'm totally in. It's very fun. It's great. Okay, so that is it for the In or Out book tag. Thank you so much to Kay's Palette for tagging me. This was super fun. It's very exciting to be tagged in things. I'm going to tag Bethany with the next chapter, as well as Danny from Literary Lion. You guys don't have to do the tag. I just thought it was really fun being tagged myself, so if you guys want to do it, have at her. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. It makes you feel, woo, a book that I can think of. Oh my god. Why does no one have drop caps in their books? I have to sneeze.